A subsection of computer fundamentals is to determine how to generally buy a computer. And this is more of a general knowledge of what makes a computer. We are going to go through it quite quickly. So we look at the relevant information that can help you buy a desktop or laptop, and we do that by component basis. We know that desktops or laptops are highly customizable, so it is better to learn about the main parts that constitute a laptop instead of just visiting one model and saying that I want one model that appeals to your eye. So there are quite common models that you might find in the market, such as Dell, Lenovo, HP, or Apple MacBooks. Which one is missing here? You might also find Samsung. They are not very common, but they are there. You might also find Toshiba. Toshiba is also exiting the market, among others. But the most common ones is HP. Dell is there, Lenovo. This is not very common because it's also quite pricey. So we are going to look at what specs you're going to be looking at when you are buying your own laptop or your own desktop. And we start by the screen size. Or what you will observe is that the screen size is normally measured by its diagonal size. So when you hear that a laptop has a screen of 15.6 inch, is actually measured from the one diagonal line from the one side to the farthest corner. So that is what you should identify that characterizes the screen size. Number two, there are screens that might have the same size but different resolution. And the higher the resolution, the better the quality of the screen. And I will show you with mine because mine is quite pricey. And if you right click on your screen and go to graphic options, then you'll see somewhere that you are seeing that is called resolution. And mine is actually the highest, currently supporting 2560 by 1440. But the most common one that you find in the market is around 1280 by 1040. So you can see there is a very big gap between the 1280 and 2560. But nevertheless, all these will be adequate for a normal usage of a computer. The minimum you should go for is actually 12 watt. I think 1280 versus 768. If you get one that is less than this one, then you'll be working at a very minimal resolution. The one that I'm sure will be very poor for normal working is 800 by 600. So that is what we are talking about. The higher the resolution, the better the display or quality of the pictures. Now, the other thing that you also observe about the monitor or the screen is that some screens have USB ports, others don't have. That is never a big issue. But if you're concerned with plugging in a flash disk on your laptop, quite often there are screens that allows you to have USBs that can accept a USBs at that point. So, but that is not a very big issue. Well, this is more about monitors that are not for laptops. So there are some of them are adjustable, others are not. So that depending on what you like, it's okay. But for the normal usage of a computer, I think for me the ideal one is 17 inch to 24 inch. Anything between that one is okay. For laptops, 15.6 is okay, or 13 inch is okay. But then when you go less than this to 11, then you find that the screen size becomes very small for a laptop. But for a laptop, the range between 15.6 to 13 inch is relatively okay. But for desktops, sometimes desktops require higher screen sizes. Therefore, you can go with anything between 17 inch to 24 inch. Then we talk about the other characteristic that you should look at, which is the operating system. And as we have already discussed in the previous lecture, our operating system is the main software on which the computer runs. And if you need to make a very serious decision when you are determining what kind of laptop you will be buying. The main operating systems that run on laptops are Windows, Linux, or Apple OS. This one runs on Apple devices, therefore you cannot put them anywhere else. But on normal PC, you can either install Windows or Linux. So you can always determine which one is in your best interest. Sometimes people are quite often used to working with Windows for normal home use. But then for those who are more experienced, they might install Linux operating systems that are generally free. And therefore they are more friendly for the pocket. Most of the Windows operating system, some of them are available when you buy, But then if they are not available, you need to buy or purchase the operating system. So as I have mentioned, Apple OS X is normally proprietary to Apple devices. By the time this was written, the most popular was Windows 7, but time has gone where the most common operating system is Windows 10, and therefore you'd actually find that the most appropriate version of the operating system that you use most conveniently is Windows 10. There are different variants or versions of Windows 10. Leave alone now 8 and 7. We're now talking about Windows 10. There are different versions. You might find Pro, you might find Ultimate, you might find the Home Premium or Starter, etc. But the best for that comes with most features is the one that is called Windows Professional, although Windows Home Premium will still be okay. Nowadays, computers, when you're buying a computer, you'd need an optical drive for writing and reading CDs and DVDs. But for a laptop, most of them nowadays do not even come with this one. But if you are buying a device that comes with an optical drive, then the best one would be the DVD burner. And for memory is very key, and therefore you would need to be very sensitive when you are buying a laptop. It actually determines the speed and how well the computer runs, and therefore the higher the memory, the better. And of course, we normally look at the processor and the memory. So these are the very key features that you must be very careful when selecting. And therefore, the higher the memory, the better. The higher the processor speed, the better. And the minimum is allowed 1 GB. This has also, of course, been overtaken by event. I think 2 GB would be the minimum, but the recommended one would be anything 4 GB to 8 GB be the best for a laptop. You can always be able to check the computer, what it is running on, personal computer, and then you go to properties. Yeah, you can click and then say properties, and you actually observe that you can always see how much RAM it has. Mine has 8 GB of RAM, and you can see that you're going to be seeing this Core i7. In the next few minutes, you're going to be discussing the cores that characterize the processor. So these are very obvious features that you must get used to before you buy a computer, because they will directly affect how the computer runs. So I'm saying the minimum would be 4 GB, the recommended one would be, for me, would be 8 GB. Now, hard drive, there is now hard drive or SSD. Actually, the SSD is called solid state drive. This is a more recent version of hard drive that is not dependent on revolutions of the disk. The disk normally revolves for the hard disk. For you to access any information, you would need to it to keep on rotating until you go to the track where the information is stored. But now with the solid state drive, this one is a storage device that uses ICs to store data persistently, that is similar to the one that we use in flash disk or flash memory, and it is much faster in speed and capable of responding. The access time of data when stored in SSD is actually the same, whereas hard drive, it depends on the location of memory when you're accessing it from the hard drive. So we are saying that when you are buying, again, the most important characteristic to check is the size. The higher the size, the better. But choosing between these two, this one is way much faster than the hard drive, and the CPU is the one that characterizes the processor or the speed of the CPU. So you are going to find computers are characterized by the number of cores and the speed of each core. So the speed of each core you might find is normally in today's rates calculated in gigahertz. So a lower machine would be 1.2 gigahertz, or a lower processor would be 1.2 to 1.6. But then on the higher side, you might find 2.4, 2.6, 2.8, and sometimes 3. These are the most common, particularly when you are dealing with multi-core processors. So the higher the speed of the processor, the better. Now the cores, we find laptops that are coming in multiple cores. In the early days, we used to have a dual core. Dual core would mean that there are two processors. Then there were core 2 duo. I think this was 4. There were 4, but how they're operating is I can't go into the details for now. But nowadays we are finding them in the Core i3. This was the one that followed Core 2 Duo. Then there was Core i5, and then there's Core i7. Today there might be Core i9, but I'm not very sure about that. But as we have seen when I was checking on my specifics, my laptop is Core i7. You can see Intel Core i7, and the speed of the processor is 2.6. There are 4 processors, each with 2.6 gigahertz speed each. And therefore, you must always be conversant with this. Of course, the higher you go, the more expensive it gets. But of course, the higher the speed also it gets. So sometimes you need to balance between the cost and the speed so that you buy the laptop that are within your speed requirements. So that marks the end of that summary of what you would buy. So if you are to determine the laptop you want to buy, depending on the typical student use, if I was to talk about a student laptop, you'd work with the Core i3 to Core i5 would be sufficient. I'm using Core i7 because I am a heavy user of laptop. Sometimes I do programming and run heavy softwares that are very demanding on the speed. And then you should look at the 2.x. Anything 2.x will provide the speed of the processor, and therefore you might look for Core i3 and Core i5, and then the one that I would recommend about hard disk or storage would be, I would recommend for SSD. But again, if you are limited, you can do with anything with 500 GB. But SSD are normally quite expensive, so you might realize that 256 GB for SSD would be quite pricey and be adequate for you. Talk about RAM. RAM, we have said the minimum is 4 GB, and the recommended one is 8 GB. This would serve you quite well. We have talked about the screen size. We have said that anything between 13-inch to 15.6 inch would be adequate for a laptop, and for a desktop, anything between 17-inch to 24-inch would be again adequate. The most recommended one, anything 17-inch, 19-inch would be fine. So that marks the end of that subtopic, and I hope that now you are wiser and more knowledgeable about making a choice on what device to buy.